discussing representation of gender, we have to talk about issues of sexuality. And of course, when you watched Killing Us Softly, you saw the importance of women as sexual beings in marketing and advertising, right? But as we're talking about feminine sexuality here, I want to focus on issues related to sort of what we call post-feminist sexuality. So when we're talking about post-feminism, this term which you may or may not be familiar with, but it's the idea that, because it's post-feminism, the idea that women can sort of do any job. There's no really law prohibiting women from a certain employment, that there are laws that are meant to protect women's pay in the workplace. We've also discussed really how those laws haven't done all they could do, right? We've talked about that in this class. But the idea that, look, you look at the women who've risen in politics, the sort of position that women hold in politics, right? And we now even have, a woman elect as vice president. So, right, I mean, women can go all the way to the top or adjacent to it, sort of thing, right? So we really don't need feminism anymore. And so it's post-feminist that we're now in this time when when gender equality has been established, and what we're experiencing is this time of gender equality. So we're past the time of feminism and really past the time of needing feminism. I and many other feminists find this to be not true, but this is an argument that sort of circulates in culture. Much the idea of post-racism is that, look, we had Obama as president, so there's no more racism. Okay, well, we know that's, a load of horse shit. Okay, so as we're talking about post-feminism and sexuality, one of the things we have to recognize is the ways that men have enjoyed sexuality as part of their agency. And what I mean by that is if you think about the ways that we have culturally and also in media, right, praised and celebrated men for their sexual accomplishments. There's been the rare woman who we have in media who has been sexually very sort of voracious, if you will, and it's been some sort of point of pride. I mean, the Blanche Devereaux character, the character Rue McClanahan played in Golden Girls comes to mind, but otherwise you get a lot of characters like the Barney Stinson from How I Met Your Mother, or this is going back quite a bit, Dan, the character of Dan, played by John Larroquette in Night Court, right, of these men who are sexually really very active, and in a certain way that makes them studs. It's a sign of their confidence, their masculinity, yeah, just sort of their a source of social admiration, perhaps, right? And also that men's sexuality has been something that they exercise. By that I just mean that they're sexual, and so it's something that their sexuality, so they engage in. It's part of their agency. It's what they do just to enjoy life. It's their sexuality, right? With women, we more often get the image that a woman's sexuality is her power, right? That she's not powerful because she is sexual, but it's because she's sexual that she has her power. And so that's why I've asked you to look at that clip from Charlie's Angels to think about the scenario we get, that it's sort of tired in some ways, but the idea of the woman gets the upper hand with the man through seducing him, and he becomes powerless. And also refer you back to the Fiat commercial, which I showed you earlier, so let's go back and look at that, right? That in those, the man feels small and weak and intimidated because she is so wonderfully, powerfully sexual, right? So it's not that these women have sexuality they enjoy for their own sake, but it is the means by which they gain power. Actually, there's a study that came out a few years ago I saw, even it talked about that when girls, right, adolescent girls are exposed to, or let's say they watch a show that does this, that portrays women's sexuality or women's powers coming from her sexuality, that they come to adopt that viewpoint. And so these adolescent girls came to believe that, in fact, if they could be confident in their sexuality, or sort of deploy their sexuality like you see in Charlie's Angels and that Fiat commercial, that would be ways for them to have confidence and power, right? It's through their sexuality they could gain that. And so that's a complicated depiction of sexuality. And one of the ways that also you see it play out is that when we get looking at children's media, when we get things that are sort of these contemporary or updated children's media, and by that I mean, pieces of children's media from the 80s that gets updated in the 90s and then the aughts and even now into this last decade, that often when the images of uh, female characters have been made more contemporary, they've been updated, they also become very sexually normative. And I say sexually normative, meaning our standards of sexual attractiveness here in dominant U.S. And there's a pattern that I'm going to show you here of the ways in which these female characters, and just being updated, more contemporary, and you would think then perhaps more, more enlightened, more egalitarian, they actually become much more sexual. So this is the first version of My Little Pony from the 80s. And then we have My Little Pony that came back around in the teens and that my daughter became, pretty obsessed with. And actually, this, by the way, is one of her favorite characters, right? And there you go. So let's look at how these characters change, right? And so if you look at the general shape of the body here, right? You see the shape of the body here, the character on the left, and then as we look at the character on the right, that the body has thinned out, right? The main body is thinned out. If you look at the legs are sort of less chunky. They're now more lithe and streamlined. This thick, full neck has become much more slender. Boy, we had those eyelashes there, didn't we? But you can see how big these eyes are, right? These are really big eyes. And you can see that there's a certain sort of curve. The body can't really see it there. It sort of shows off the bottom there, but you're getting that, right? This more sexualized character. We also have strawberry shortcake, right? So here is sort of our original strawberry shortcake, pretty dumpy looking. Looks like a little girl, and like a really little girl, or sort of that those nice broad sort of cheeks, and just the way she's dressed. Just even the way she's sitting there makes me think she's like 3 years old. You're just a little girl. Right. So then, late 80s, early 90s, this is what she looks like. And she's been updated some, so now she's ditched her leggings and these sort of pantaloons she's wearing underneath for her blue jeans. Okay, fair enough. But then in the teens, we got this, right? And you see again how the eyes become much more exaggerated. Note the thinness of the arms and the legs, and it's hard to tell exactly where the waist is. I would presume somewhere up here, which makes her very sort of Barbie-like, the idea of extremely long legs. But yeah, it's just and the way she has this pose now. See this pose, standing on one leg, but then this other leg here is bent. And it's just a more sexualized image. And by the way, that is My Little Strawberry Shortcake. When she was, gosh, must have been 3 years old, that was her as our little strawberry shortcake. Okay, sorry about that. This is Rainbow Bright. You see her in 84 and 96, which is sort of different style altogether. 2004 looked an awful lot like 1984, right? It looked very similar. And then, boy, by the time we get to 2014, wow, right? She has, look at the difference of those legs and the exposure of the arms as well to emphasize the thinness. Again, the eyes have gotten really big here, right? That nice thin neck, the more narrow waisted there. Although still some sort of odd proportion from beginning to end, but you're seeing that sort of pattern. And it's not to say that this, by the way, the general pattern of sexualizing has always been great for men. You see the early images, you look here, these three, the early images of the men playing Batman, they were just sort of men who had just at least full trunks, right? Let's say that portion of their body was just sort of full, perhaps muscular. And then the importance of accentuating the muscles until the muscles have a sort of harsh, especially here, sort of harsh, violent, look like the muscles themselves look like they would hurt you just, being put up against them. But that's a pattern we see, like, really starting in the late 80s. This is Michael Keaton, and was at 88, 89 as I'm Batman, right? So there has been some effect for men. But if we go back to this, now this is from the 80s, well, maybe late 70s, but I want to say the early 80s. And this was, it was the Super Friends. It's called the Super Friends. And so first we're going to look here at Batman, and we do see, right, his muscles, but I want you to pay attention to the way that his head, the way it sits in a general proportion to his shoulders, not, it's a little bit exaggerated still, right? And Wonder Woman is true. Wonder Woman here is mostly leg. But if we compare that to a more updated version, you see how much worse this has gotten in terms of just how large. I mean, this is impossibly large arms here on this Batman. This older Batman, not so much, but here, these impossibly large arms, how much more genuinely square these shoulders are, how the head has shrunk in proportion to it for the man. And look at these weird angles of the fully sculpted body. Here we get the general how a body might normally be through much workout, but this is a weird sort of sculpted body, but of strong musculature. But then Wonder Woman, I mean, gosh, where do we start here about the way the neck has gotten longer and thinner, right? The bust has become more rounded, more sort of, if you will, voluptuous. I don't know what word to use there. Look at the waist, right? The waist here was thin already, but this is sort of impossible, right? But then with these curvaceous, desirable hips, right? And so you're seeing that, and really, and even a stronger emphasis in the way how much more narrow her total body is next to his. Again, it's that pattern of these unrealistic ideals. I say not always great for men, but we're seeing it in terms of sexuality, what it has happened with women.